Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm Camden Fells, and this is Nuggets Podcast, Conscious Conversations, and I appreciate you all being here. I'm so excited to be able to launch our first episode of this podcast. Conscious Conversations is all about raising human consciousness through my own transformation. And, I've got some friends that I've been working with, and Conscious Conversations is actually a idea that is very real and very new. 2 years ago, I had a conversation with a buddy of mine named Adam, and we had one of our neighborhood hangouts, and our neighborhood hangout always had that table in the back where nobody would bother us, and we would have conscious conversations. And during that time, we were saying, well, wow, how cool would it be to be able to pull some of our resources and the friends that we have out there to have some of these high-level conversations and open it up to the public. So that's the purpose of this series. And if you have not done it already, please subscribe and share our page because we're wanting to raise awareness around what we're doing. And without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and introduce my guest, Maria Laura, who is a yoga teacher here in the United States. And we're going to be talking about today the concept of conscious coupling. And what is it that I mean by conscious coupling? I'm wanting to talk about how principles of yoga anchor marriage into an authentic experience of balance and meaning. Here in the United States, we can see through the statistics that, couples that stay together, it seems to be a wash, just as many do as don't. And I'm wondering to myself, how can yoga pull together this experience to be more of a harmonious experience, an experience of expansion, and an experience that's enjoyable, into the future. So that's what Maria and I are going to talk about today. So I want to give a formal introduction, but I figure the best way to do this is to just let Maria speak for herself. So Maria, please share with us some of your story, maybe your path to yoga, and then from there we'll get into relationships and marry everything together.
Okay, so thank you so much for having me. First and foremost, I'm really honored to be here, and I'm really grateful to have this opportunity to talk to you about yoga as well. So I really stumbled across yoga through my travels. So I was traveling through Thailand, and it was a very close decision for me whether to go to a full moon party or whether to go to a meditation Vipassana retreat, which are two very different things. And I ended up in that Vipassana retreat. It was in Suratani, and this one was a little less traditional in the sense that there was a little movement, a little yoga allowed as well. Most of the Vipassanas only have the meditating without any movement. But this one did, and it was the most profound experience for me. It was the first time that I really dove into meditation, and I came out very changed, and I came out feeling so good that this stayed with me. Even though I didn't really continue practicing meditation on a consistent level, I remembered the experience, and at a later point, I think it was like a year later, I decided to fully get more into yoga and then do a yoga teacher training. So this is how I started with yoga. My first training was in India in 2016. And then I didn't really teach a lot back then. I taught a little bit, but I didn't have the full confidence yet. And I had a feeling that something was missing to what I wanted to share. And so I stumbled across another teacher when I returned to the same yoga school and did an internship there in India. And she told me about a training she had done in Bali. And so I went to that training. That was a bit more traditional, where the breath and meditation was a bigger focus. We had some of that in the first training, but it was more an alignment. The second one was more about the philosophy and the energetics of yoga, especially. Yes, and then I started teaching full-time in Italy, and I started opening my own studio, and I started a meditation course. There was a year-long program that was very good for me as well, to dive more into yoga as a lived experience, and especially as meditation. With the pandemic, I closed my studio and I started traveling, and I spent a year in Mexico, and I'm now here in the States, and teaching yoga here as well as a little bit of online as well.
Wow, that's beautiful. So you threw out three concepts there that I want to circle back around on, and that's meditation, that's yoga, and that's energetics. You threw that out there as well. And so I guess maybe we start lower level and build from there, just kind of in layman's terms. When you think of a concept like yoga, when I think of yoga, the meaning behind that to me kind of means union. I know there's a lot of meanings out there, but to the person that's never heard of yoga, or maybe thinks it's just something that the girls do in their, sort of their stretch pants and their yoga mat, what could you give them to let them know exactly what yoga has to offer and how it is beneficial to the human being?
Well, that's a very, very big concept and big questions. And I usually, when I do have a person in front of me that has very little information about yoga, I sort of see from which direction he's coming from. And there's a way to talk about yoga that's more on the scientific level. There's a way of yoga to talk about well-being, relaxation, and then there's deep philosophies as well. Yoga has been born in India, and it's very, very old. It goes back to ancient India and the Vedas. And at first, it wasn't really much about the yoga poses. That was just a small part, but it kind of started with people wanting to find out more of their own inner nature and the workings of their mind. And they went to isolate themselves and to study themselves deeply to find out about their own nature and how to reunite with a greater consciousness than just everyday life consciousness. Let's just say that. So it was a path to freedom, spiritual freedom. And then slowly, there was different traditions and different schools of thoughts within the yoga, and it became something that wasn't just for the elite, or wasn't just for some chosen ones that would go maybe into a cave and meditate there, but it would become available for everyday people that had families, that had jobs. And this is more the tantric approach of yoga, where they also use maybe more of those energetics, meaning when we think of yoga, we think of the yoga postures, and that's definitely a part. And when I speak about the energetics, then I do mean combination of postures, but also breath work and different meditation visualizations. But then there's also the philosophy of, for example, Patanjali, which is something that every yoga teacher will learn. And in that philosophy, we can see that yoga is an 8 path, where asanas is just one of those 8 limbs that sort of lead to meditation and to a deeper understanding of not just our nature, but
wow. Yeah, so I heard you say in there spiritual freedom. Is that how you put that? Where, in that's an important concept, because when I look at we're kind of turning the corner on relationships here. It's like freedom, spiritual freedom, and then you couple that with yoga, meaning union. So if you're separate from yourself, if you're separate from yourself, then you don't feel free. And it seems that puts pressure on the relationship to gather that feeling of freedom from the other. In that sense, have you been able to leverage yoga in some way to have a more healthy relationship with your spouse? And how does that go for you? And do you have any information for us there?
So yeah, maybe it's a good concept to think about, that when we do a Vipassana retreat, or when we go into isolation and meditate, it's very easy to have this calm, stable mind and to have these spiritual experiences. But when we are thrown out into everyday life, where we're meeting other people and having loud noises around us, and there's just life going on and it's messy, then it's obviously more difficult to keep a spiritual practice. But this is where yoga developed from what I was saying earlier. Just a few people going off into the Himalaya and meditating there until enlightenment, to wanting to bring yoga to everyone, to people that have normal lives, and integrating spirituality into a everyday life. And so relationships to me are very much it's not just a relationship to myself, but a relationship to everyone else, and they're very much as spiritual as everything else, right? Mm-hmm. So it is not just about how I can be when I'm by myself, but also how can I be, or who do I want to be when I'm triggered by other people, when I'm in relationship with other people. Right. So I'm not sure where your question was and if I answered.
No, you did answer that, and that's good. So it's almost like society is its own pose in that sense. Looking at yoga and how it has different ways of working with the body and the geometry like that. It's almost like society or that coworker that gives you a hard time all the time. That's a pose in and of itself to bring you into more presence, in a sense. Is how I see that. Does that track with you at all?
Yeah, it's so the goal of yoga, or let's just say when I started to do yoga more, and when especially I got more into meditating, I started to realize that yoga is not something that I do in the morning or in the evening, and the rest, it doesn't matter how I spend the day, but it's more so that my concept of spirituality started to get infused with my whole day, my whole life. It's not just one aspect that's spiritual and everything else isn't. Meditating is just as spiritual in a way as going to the grocery store and how do you treat the person working there, So these everyday life things can be a great practice for you to practice yoga, especially if you come from on a more of the philosophy side of yoga. So yoga teaches you how to have a better relationship to your mind. It asks you question of what is important to you, what is not important to you. So it is about getting to know yourself better. And when you do know yourself better, then you have better ability to deal with other people better. So when you have more compassion towards yourself, it's easier to have compassion towards other people as well. When you realize your own conditioning and how you grew up and how that influenced you, it's easier to understand that other people also are just acting out their own patterns. And then there's the self-regulation part. So the yoga that we often think about is the practicing of different postures, so breathings, meditations that will bring you in a specific state of mind. And so if you do yoga on a daily basis, you can balance out where you're off balance, and that will help you to have a better capacity to live life better in a way, right? That it's kind of easy to be very nice and grounded when you're in nature, but what happens when you live in a noisy city? What happens when there's a bar underneath you and they play loud music until 7 a.m? That's the questions where maybe you need some of the practices to stay centered inside of you. Or what if you have to work a lot and you need enough energy to be able to do that, to get to your next stage of life where you change things.
That's beautiful.
So yoga is for me a daily practice, or something that is a tool for you to get back into your center. And it's also a way of getting to know your own nature better and creating more compassion and love for yourself that you then can also give to your relationships. And it's not just a romantic relationship, it's everyday life relationships.
I see. So yes, because it's the kind of your relationship to everything in that sense. And my question too would be on this, just looking at intimate relationships I don't know if there's any yogic material out there that talks about this, but does this path work if both people in the relationship aren't on it? You know, where you have someone that may have met yoga 10 years ago, and so now today they meet the love of their life and they know nothing about yoga or a spiritual path. Is that something that becomes imbalanced? Do they talk about things like that? Or how do you infuse this sort of philosophy of loving oneself into a brand new relationship to make it more successful, do you think?
So your question was, what if one practices yoga and the other one doesn't? Or
or not even on a path. You know, we see a lot of that where you may have a family where you come out of a certain condition and you're the one person that is now on some sort of a path, if you want to call it that, where everyone else is still like you were when you were 5, you know. And let's say that you met someone that you were considering for, you know, an intimate relationship. Could that be something that works? Or it just seems like a really peculiar question to ask, but I'm just wondering about that.
You know, that is a very valid question. And I personally think that when you are on a path and when you're dedicated to getting to know yourself better, when you're dedicated to becoming a better person, whatever tools you're using, whether that is yoga or whether that's something else, then you're most likely going to attract people in your life that you feel that they're on the same vibration. So even if they're not specifically interested into a spiritual path, maybe they had a type of life where they learned a lot about themselves, where they had maybe some hardship, where suddenly they became aware of, wait a minute, how do I want to live my life? How do I want to create with what I've got and with the rest of the time that I've got here on the planet? So even if it's not coming from a philosophical background of yoga or even meditating that much, I sometimes think that there's people that maybe don't seem to be spiritual, but they still may be more present than someone that meditates regularly. Maybe they work on a field and they're just out in nature every day, or they're very present with their kids or whatever it is. So I do think you can get in a relationship with someone that's not on the path of yoga, but I will say that most likely the person that you're attracting, and that's just my personal belief, is going to reflect something inside of you as well. So when you're attracting someone that isn't maybe he's mirroring something to you, or she, right? Or there's a lesson to learn through that person, and maybe that relationship is important for you, but it's not a long relationship that will last forever. And if you do meet the person where you feel there is a deep connection, most likely there has to be a lot of matches in your frequency, so there will be similarities that you both have, or similar values, for example, of growth and of expansion, of adventure, whatever it is for you, freedom, and so you match on that level. And then often, if one person in the relationship goes higher, out of love, the other person can also lift up. And if both people are ending up on different levels, naturally the relationship will most likely end, and then there's space maybe for the next one.
I like how you said that. In the mirroring, that's important. You know, it's interesting. You start to talk about some of these concepts, and I know I've been in situations where I've noticed cycles, I've noticed loops in my life. You know, I don't know if yoga speaks to that or not. And then I also have noticed recurring themes in relationships too. And so I'm wondering that I would guess that this is part of the human experience. If you're perceiving it, you know, it's not just me. How when you're faced with something like this, where you're triggered because of you know, a wound that comes up because of an interaction with the other, what aspects of yoga are you using to sort of go back and stabilize and go back to the center to be able to see that resistance for what it is, and to move past that. Because I kind of feel like just in a situation where you don't have a path that can teach balance like yoga does, that's part of where the relationships become imbalanced. So I'm wondering, how do you utilize yoga to shore yourself back up when those things arise in you?
So in my own experience, for me, I think the whole process started when I was doing the physical yoga more, and a lot of old traumas and old patterning started to become more aware, or I became aware of patterns that I wasn't aware of before. I became aware of emotions that were stuck in the body that I wasn't aware before. And so this is sort of the first step. And then with the yoga tradition that I come from, um, the yoga that we teach for the most part beginners is stabilizing and grounding and helping them to have a more of a clear mind, so that they are able to see their own patterns, to stop and reflect of what's happening. Because like you said, for myself as well, I started to get into similar patterns with with very different men from different countries, but they have similar patterns that I attracted or that I was okay with being. And so slowly, when you do the inner work, and yoga can be a great help with that, but yoga would also include journaling and just becoming aware of, your patterns, then you can start to put an end to this loop and start with a new and higher way to attract a new relationship. So on that note, with what you said, how can we balance ourselves? There's different yoga techniques. For example, very practically speaking, if you do more forward folds, so it's anything where your upper body goes downwards towards your legs, they have a very calming and grounding effect. They help you to literally look inside of you. They sometimes bring up old stuff from the past. So a lot of people don't actually like doing them. They're not as fun as other poses, but they are very, very helpful, especially in the beginning phases. And these forward folds also assist us in elongating the exhale. The exhale is assisting us to let go, not just the stale air that we're letting go, but also old stories, beliefs, toxins, negativity. So this exhale is grounding and at the same time letting go of all of that. And through that, we find a more stable and calm mind. And that will help us to go more towards meditation. And again, meditation can help us then to be able to see through our own stuff. Because we see it so easy with other people, but with ourselves, it's more hard. Right. And when we do, and when we become aware, clearly aware, and I'm like, I don't actually want that. I feel like I should raise my expectations. I can do better than this sort of relationship. I can be, and it's not just the other person, it's also who are we being in the relationship. For me, I had a long time where I was single. It was 5 years of single and like 3 years of not seeing a guy at all. And it was a very conscious decision, at least for the first year, where I was like, I'm not going to be with any guy because I need to fully heal from all of my relationships. And then slowly become aware of who do I want to be with. And maybe an interesting story to tell with that is when I was ready for the new relationship, at first I had this long list of what I would like from a man. And suddenly, even though I was working really hard and I wasn't around any guys, this guy just appeared out of nowhere. And he had all these things on the list. It was kind of creepy. But it didn't work out. And then I realized I was still attracting someone with commitment issues, which I had myself. And then I ditched the whole list and I was like, okay, I'm gonna focus on the feeling. How do I want to feel? And just 3 main qualities. I want someone with a really big heart that feels deeply, with a critical mind that's able to think for himself, and someone that makes me feel, where I feel a lot towards that person, a big connection, and that manifested for me as well.
Wow. So anybody that thinks manifestation is not real, you're a walking testimony, huh?
It was tough, I must say. I put it in my phone. I put it as in meeting the one, and I remember seeing it, and I was like, "Ugh, I don't believe in this cliche stuff." But often before, I just wanted a relationship rather than a relationship that would last, because I did, like I say, as a Sagittarius, just valued my freedom above everything else. But there's also this misconception that you think another person is going to slow me down. That was my limiting belief. But in reality, it could be different. Another person can help you lift each other up as well.
Very wise words. Like, yes, I just actually had this conversation with someone else yesterday, so this is good.
That's awesome.
You brought up something good too, where you talked about the breath, and my understanding of the breath is that when you break down the etymology of breath, it means spirit, and I can tell that my relationship with the breath is more intimate, just because of the time that I've spent with it. So I'm wondering, how does the breath deepen intimacy in a romantic relation, or does it, in a committed relationship? What is that extra overlay that the breath really offers when you're able to abide in it? I'd love to know your response to that.
I think the breath is our ticket to change a lot of the things inside of us that are happening subconsciously. So, or where we feel we don't have control over, right? We cannot tell our nervous system what to do. It's very hard to control the quality of our thoughts. When the thoughts are spiraling downwards, to put an end on that is tricky. But through the breathing, we have this anchor to change this whole system that's all linked. So when we breathe consciously, we can change the quality of the nervous system, meaning we come out of a fight and flight response and we go into a parasympathetic nervous system, or just into a balanced, even if it's sympathetic, nervous system. And that will bring with it a balanced mind that sees more clearly as well. And, when we're in a danger situation, whether that's imagined or real, we're not connected to our heart, right? So when we're in a constant stress response, how are we going to live out of our hearts and not just fear?
Mm.
So to have the breath with us is such a free tool for us to stay within our heart and live our life out of the heart. And that's what we want from a partner, right? Someone that's connected to his heart, her heart. And so I think the breath is an amazing tool for us to first become aware if we're out of balance, because sometimes we don't even know, and we're like, oh, my breath feels very restricted. Maybe I'm not feeling too great right now. And then in yoga, you can work with the different energetics of inhale, exhale as well, where you like maybe do more. If you're feeling more on the sad, depressed side, very often it's quite beneficial to do more inhaling practices that open up the lungs. So you do more back bends, you do more laterals, and you have a bigger focus on the inhale and inhale the tension to bring in new life force and to enliven your heart space. So we talked about the exhale before. If you're feeling very anxious and ungrounded, do some exhaling practices first. And you're just going to show up differently to your relationship, and not just your intimate relationship, but also your other relationships.
Yes. It's interesting because, I'm not a person that's married or has an intimate relationship in that sense. And I wonder if it makes sense, or if yoga, the practice of yoga, advocates for having a household practice. Because you're right. I mean, sometimes you just wake up on the wrong side of the bed, and it happens before. And even when you come out of your practice, it may just be a challenging day for a number of different reasons. Is it is it more of a united front when there is a household practice that says, hey, we've got a protocol for these kinds of things? Or is it not that rigid, and it's just kind of personal responsibility? You just want to get back to love as quickly as possible, and you know the shortest point to that distance is through the breath. How would you respond to something like that?
I think it depends on the couple, but I do believe that in a conscious relationship, you want to help each other, and so you support each other in what you know is best for them. So, sometimes Kenny would be like, maybe go and meditate. Do you want to meditate? I'm like, yeah, good idea. Sure, calm down.
So breathe.
And I don't mind that, and I would remind him to do something as well, or to do a meditation, and we do sit down and meditate together, or if we do some yoga together. I think that's a really good thing to do. But at the end of the day, you're still responsible for your own practice and finding what works for you, because yoga is supposed to be something that's personalized. So as great as it is to go to yoga classes, I feel like everyone should learn some of the basics that you can do your own practice at home. And then realize, what kind of practice do I need at what time? So doing Kapalabhati breath every day may not be the right thing for you, Just doing exhaling practice will also not be the right thing. So you need a little toolbox of different things that work for you, and then you can choose from that according to your needs. That's what I think.
Wow, that's beautiful. That is so good. We're right here, getting close to the 30-minute mark, and I don't want to keep everyone too long, and I want to respect your time too. Do you have any closing remarks? The mission of this podcast is to be able to bring concepts to people and the public that they just may not be aware of. And we're not saying, hey, go into yoga, and nobody's saying that. But what we are saying is that if this is resonating at all, to go and do your own research in your own city or state or country, and see how a concept like this could improve your life. And so, as your parting words, do you have any words of encouragement or any story or any thing that channels through you that would help people understand that healthy relationships are out there, but the healthiest relationship that one has to have is with their own selves?
Absolutely. I think you really nailed it. It all starts with ourselves. I have a teacher, and she used to tell me, when you change, everything else changes. And it is very true, because everything that you don't want to put up with in your life anymore, you will have the energy to say no, to change your circumstances, and you will be able to be around people that will support you more. But if you're thinking about starting yoga, there's no you don't have to be young, you don't have to be flexible, and you most definitely don't have to have a quiet mind. You start where you are. If you can breathe, you can do yoga. And yoga is just for you to have something which is your body, your breath, your energy, and some small toolbox to come back into a state of balance. And very often we think, okay, we can have a glass of wine, or we can do this or that, or we go and have a massage. But very often all we need to do is, we don't even have to have a yoga mat. We can just be on the floor and maybe do a forward fold and put a hand on our belly and breathe into our belly, and maybe connect to our heart and say some encouraging words to ourselves. And that's already the first step of yoga, I would say.
Wow, that's so good. Oh, thank you so much, Maria, for doing this with me. How can people find you? I'm sure there's going to be some folks out there that are going to resonate with your message. Do you have social media or websites or anything for people to get a hold of you?
Yeah, if you would like to reach out, you can always write me a message on either Instagram. So my Instagram is marialaura_yoga, and my website would be www.marialaurayoga.com as well.
Nice. All right. Well, perfect. Well, I thank you so much for sharing space with me, Maria. I learned a lot today. I know that this message is going to reverberate through the cosmos. And before we leave, I don't know. I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, but you had mentioned to me that April 12th is a very special day, astrologically speaking, which is another aspect that we'll be talking about here on conscious conversations. So I thought if you have any final comments on that as well, just to educate the people on what's going on above us, that would be really cool if you do that.
Yeah, so I'm not an astrologer, but I got really interested into astrology recently. And today we've got Jupiter Neptune conjunction in Pisces, which happens every 166 years. So it's a very special occasion. And it is an invitation for us to dream bigger. It's a very powerful time for any spiritual practice. As Jupiter is an expansive planet and Neptune is a very spiritual, underwater, sort of like water god planet. It can manifest in a more negative light as well. So it is really up to us to use the energy wisely. And with negative, I mean Neptune also sometimes has this tendency to go into a disillusion, into toxins, into addiction. So that is a lower expression of what we actually crave of, which is a spiritual connection, which is a sense of freedom, spiritual freedom. I think that's why people do a lot of drugs, right? Because they want to be not in this reality where they are right now and we want to have some freedom. But we can find that also through a spiritual practice. And so this Jupiter Neptune conjunction, if you do have a spiritual practice, would be very helpful for you to just get you up there. And even if you know it's already later when you watch this, the energy is going to be in this talk, and the energy of this conjunction will be going on for the next few months. So you can really use this time to also dream bigger. That's a big topic. And yeah.
Well, that's good. Well, I'm glad that we were able to do this together on this day because it means a lot to me. And thank you for sharing the space with me. Hopefully we can have you back on the show again here in the future since you're alumni now. So this is good.
Thank you, Cam, so much. It was a lot of fun talking to
No problem. No problem at all. And thank you, everyone, for listening. I'm Camden Fells, and this is Conscious Conversations. And I look forward to talking to you guys again soon. Take care.